In the previous part, we worked on the search. So now you can start typing to filter out a product that you want. In this part, we'll be working on the cart section here. So having a look at our screens, we'll be working on the design of the items on the cart page. And then after, we'll look at how we can add the items to the cart. Also, we'll look at how to clear the items from the cart and also update the cart badge here to match the number of items in the cart. When the cart is empty, we'll design a component for the page as well. And then finally, we'll learn how to save this data so that even when the app is refreshed, the cart data will still be available and then the items in the cart will not be lost. So let's get started with the design of the cart page. To start this, we need a stack navigator for the cart tab. So over here in the navigators directory, create a new file which we'll call cart stack. Now once again, this will be quite similar to our search stack. So you can visit this, select all the content and copy it. And then back in the cart stack, we can paste it here. Now we'll change the name of the component from search to cart stack. You can copy the name and make sure we are exporting that stack as well. Now over here, we'll be working with two screens as well. The first one is the cart screen. Now this is not present yet, so we need to create it. So under screens, we'll create a new file and this will be called cart. And then over here, we'll set up a basic component. Then we export as default the component. Now this screen needs to be exported in the index file. So we import the cart screen and then export it once again. Now back in the cart stack, you can import this screen in addition to the other imports. And then over here, our first screen will be the cart screen instead. Then the component will be the cart component. Then the title of the screen will be changed to cart. With this done, we can change the initial route here to cart screen. So we copy and replace it like so. The next screen will be the detail screen. So when we press on an item in the cart, it will lead us to the details of that particular item. So this is fine. Now we'll come back later on to add a few options to the cart screen. But now we can start with this. At the top, you can get rid of the product screen, which we are not using in this part. Next, we visit the root tabs here, and then we import the cart stack. So we import the cart stack, and then now we can copy the name and replace the home screen here with the cart stack for the cart screen. For this done, when we visit the tab for the cart, you can see that you have cart at the top, then the page is blank, which is to be expected. Now looking at our screens again, once we have the cart title, the closest thing is the bin at the right here, which will be used to clear all the content. So let's add it. We will do this in the cart stack. Now to be able to do this, we need to bring in touchable opacity from React Native. So we import touchable opacity from React Native. And the icon we'll be using will come from the feather icon pack from Expo Vector Icons. Now to use this, we visit the screen for the cart. Then we pass a header right property. And for this, we'll return the touchable opacity. And inside this, we'll render the feather icon. The name of the icon is trash. Give it a size of 20. Then for the color, we'll set it to our tertiary color. And then we lighten it a bit. Now when we visit the cart, we should see the icon at the right like so. Now to push the icon away from the edge of the screen, we'll add a header right container style. And in this, we'll set the right property to 15. With this done, we have our button. Then we can build on it later to get rid of the content of the cart. Looking at our screens again, the next thing we have is a list of items. So for this, we can go back to our cart screen. And over here, we'll render the list of items using the flat list. But before that, the outermost component to be returning is our main container. So we import that from our components. Then we can return that one. Also, we import before the main container our flat list from React Native. And then we can render it between the main container. Now we need some initial dummy data to help us to display the items before we update them with actual data. So for that, let's bring in our function, which is the get wine data. And that will help us to get the data that we displayed on our home page. So inside this component, we'll have a variable which will be called cart items. And for the time being, we'll set it to get wine data. And then pass an empty object like so. With this done, we can pass these cart items to the flat list through the data property. Next, we'll pass a render item to the flat list like so. And this will take a function once again, which will return a component. For this component, we will create a new one for the items on the cart page. So inside component and under cart, we will create a new component which we'll call cart card. So over here, once again, we create our function component. And then inside this, let's bring in our style text, which we'll be using anyways. So import our style text component. And then inside this, we'll return the style text saying cart item. And then at the bottom, we export this cart card as the default. Now back in the cart file, you can then import the cart item from the components. But for this to work, we need to export the cart item as well in the index file of the component. So over here, we import the cart card and then export the cart card. Then back here, it should be cart card. And then over here, for the render item, we'll return the cart card. Now this function here will have access to the items in the cart. So we can destructure each item from the list of items in the cart. Then once we have that, we can pass it to the cart card here by spreading it. Now with this done, if you go to the cart page, we should see a list of cart items like that. Now we continue in the cart card component. Over here, in addition to the style text, we need to bring in the touchable opacity from React Native. Also, we bring in the view and then the style sheet. We will also need the image component so we can import it as well. Now, the very first component, that is the outermost component, will be the touchable opacity. And inside this, as we can see from our image, the very first component is the image. So we render the image. And then after this, we'll have a view for the remaining details. For the data that will be used in this component, we'll be getting them from the props. So first of all, we can destructure the image. Then we can pass it to the image here through the source property. And then we can go ahead to style it. So beneath this, let's create the style sheet. So style sheet.create. Then our very first style will be for the touchable opacity, which we'll call container. And after this, we'll have one for the image. And also the details section. So at the top, we can pass to the touchable opacity the container style. And then to the image, we pass the image style. And then to the view, pass the details style. Starting with the container style, we want to give it a height. And for the height, we want it to be a fraction of the width of the screen. So for that, we import the screen width constant that we created earlier. So we'll get the screen width from our constant file, and that one can be found under config. So inside the container style, we'll set the height property. So we'll say screen width, and then we want this to be 43% of the screen. And then in addition to this, we want the minimum height of this to be 160. So if 43% of the screen width is less than 160, it will be increased to 160 as the minimum. Once we have this, for the content of the card, it will be in a row. So set flex direction to row. Also justify the content to have a space between them. And then we align the items to the center. Also, we'll have a border at the top. So set a border top width of 1 pixel. And then we'll set the border color to our secondary color. Now it looks like we don't have our colors here. So we import the colors from the theme file under config. Now for the image, we'll set it to have a width of 20% of the card width. And then we'll give it a height of 80%. Also, we'll set the resize mode to contain. For the details, we'll set to have a width of 75%. That is, we want it to occupy the remaining space after we have our image. With what we have now, the next thing we need to add according to our image is the name of the product and also the remove button that we have here. So for this, we'll group it into another row. So we wrap that in a view. So inside the details, we'll have another view. And this view will give it a style that we'll call name row. So in this view, we'll first have the style text for the name of the product, and also we'll have the touchable opacity for the button that will remove the item from the cart. For the name of the product, we'll destructure it from the props as well. And then we can go ahead to display it here. For the name, you want the text to be bold. And also want to limit the number of lines to 2. Also want to add some additional style. And this style will be called name. Now we can reload our app to fix the error here. Now for our icon, we'll make use of the ant design icon pack. So we import ant design from @Expo vector icons like so. And inside the touchable opacity, you can render the ant design. The name of the icon is close, and then we'll give it a size of 22. Also, we'll set the color to our tertiary color, and then we'll lighten it a bit. After the name row, we see that we have the volume of the product. So for this one, we'll do it just below the name row. and we'll make use of the styled text. And for this, we'll get it from the volume variable that will destructure from the props. For this volume, we want it to be a small text, and also we'll go ahead to add a few additional styles. So we'll give it the volume style. Now after the volume, we'll have another row for the price and then the cart counter. So for this as well, we'll wrap it in a view, and then this will be styled with the price row style. So inside here, we'll first have our style text for the price, and then the price will be making use of the currency and then the price itself. So we'll structure that as well from the props, the currency and then the price. Then over here, we'll concatenate the currency and then the price. For the price, you want it to be bold, and then we'll add a few additional styles. Now below this will be the cart counter. That's the components that we implemented for the details page of the product. So that one, we created it under inputs and then in the cart counter file. Now it looks a bit different on the cart page compared to the details page. So for now, let's render it and then we'll adjust the styling a bit in the component. So at the top, we can import cart counter from our components. So we import it just below the style text. Then we can render it just below the style text over here. Now continuing the styling with the name row, we first set a flex direction of row. Then we justify the content to have a space between it. Then we give it a margin at the bottom of 10 pixels. Now for the name style, we'll set it to have a width of 70% of the container. And then for the close button, it will be styled through the touchable opacity. So you give it a style of close button. Then we can implement the styling over here. For this, we'll give it a width of 40 pixels and also a height of the same value. Then we align the items to the end of the container, so we'll set it to flex end. Setting the width and height will give it a bigger area that we can press easily to activate removing it from the cart. Next up, we have the style for the volume. Then for this, we'll set a color to our tertiary color. Then also we'll give it a margin at the bottom of 15 pixels. For the price row, once again we'll set flex direction to row, and we'll justify the content to have space between them. Then we'll align the items to the center. For the price itself, we'll set a color for it to our accent color, and then we lighten it a bit. Now let's focus on adjusting the style of the cart counter. So for this, on the cart page, the counter is a bit smaller, so we'll pass an attribute to it. So over here, we'll pass the small attribute to the cart counter. Then we'll visit the cart counter component that is found under inputs. And then over here, we take in the small attribute. Now the view content we have here is for when we don't receive the small property. So in the return, we can first wrap everything in the fragment. Then inside this fragment, we'll make a check for the small property. So if the small property is not received, that is when we'll return this view. Then we can copy and paste this. And then we'll use the second one for when the small property is received. For styling the smaller one, we'll be creating a few style rules that will add to the existing styles over here. So for the container style, we'll create another style which will be called small container. And then that will merge with the container here to adjust the style. Also for the button, we'll convert this to an array. And then we'll add another style of small button. And then the same style will apply to the button at the right side, which increases the value. For the input field, we'll just change the whole style to small input. Now below the container, we'll create our small container style. Over here, the first thing we'll change is the height. And we'll set it to 40 pixels. Also, we'll set the width to auto. And then we'll change the background color to our primary color. For the small button, we'll go below our button. And then for this one as well, we'll set the width to auto. Then we'll give it a padding at the left of 10 pixels. Now for the small inputs, we'll go below the input once again. And then over here, we'll set the height to 30 pixels. And then we'll set the width to 40 pixels. Also give it a padding at the left of 5 pixels. And also a padding at the right of same value. Also give it a margin at the left of 10. And then we'll set the font size to 14. And then we'll give it a font weight of bold. And then text align to the center. Now we almost have the look that we are going for. Back in the card screen, we want to add some padding to the main container, which remove the content that we have here from the edge of the device. So for this, we'll give it a style. Then we'll call this container. For us to do this, we'll bring in the style sheet from React Native. And then below the cut, we'll create our style sheet. To see what is happening, we go back to the cart page. Then back in our container style, we'll set a padding at the top of 5 pixels. And then we'll set a padding horizontal of 25. Now when we scroll, we see the scroll indicator over here. So to hide this, we pass another property to the flat list, which just shows vertical scroll indicator. And we'll set it to false. So we'll no longer see the vertical scroll indicator over here. So as you can see, we are making progress towards our initial target of the design here. We've designed everything on the cart item over here. The only exception I can see is that it looks like the bottle here is bigger than what we have. So back in the cart card page, the culprit here is the resize mode. Instead of contain, we need this to be cover. Good. And this should make the bottles a bit bigger. Now the next section on our cart page is that we have a very faint divider over here. And then we have the total and the checkout button. So that's what we'll be working on now. For the divider, we'll be implementing it using a view. So at the top, we bring in the view from React Native. And then we'll render the view just below the flat list. And then we'll give it a style of divider. For the divider, we'll give it a height of 1 pixel. And then we'll give it a background color of our secondary color. Now we don't have our colors here, so we import it from the theme file. And then this should work now. Now also give it a margin vertical of 1 pixel as well. The divider is faintly displayed here. It will be quite obvious in a bit. To ensure that yours is there, you can change this color to red briefly. Then you can see that the divider is there. After, you can just undo and come back to the color. Now for the price and button section, we'll wrap it in a view. For this view, we'll style it to have a style of checkout row. Then inside this, we'll first have our styled text. This will contain the total amount that we are dealing with. So let's put a dummy value here for now. For this text, we want it to be big. And then we'll go ahead to add a few additional styles. Now after this will be our checkout button. So we import styled button from our components. Then we can render it here. For the content, it will say checkout. Now for this button as well, we'll style it. And then the style will be checkout button. Now for the checkout row, we'll start by changing the flex direction to row. Also, we'll justify the content to have a space between them. Then we'll align the items to the center. Also, we'll give it a margin vertical of 10 pixels. For the total amount, we'll set it to have a width of 40% of the cart row. And then for the checkout button itself, we'll set it to have a width of 50%. This should give us the look that we are going after. Now the remaining UI element is the count that we have next to the cart tab. So to do that, we'll visit our root tabs. And then on the cart tab screen, we'll pass the options parameter. Over here, we'll set the TabBar badge value. Then we can give it an initial value of 1. Also want to style it, so set TabBar badge style. Here we want to change the background color to our amber color. And then we set the color of the text to our primary color. In addition to this, we'll set a value for unmount on blur to true. Now this property will ensure that whenever we are moving away from the cart screen, the screen will be unmounted, and that will help us to always get an accurate value for the count that we have over here. Now with what we've done so far, if we have nothing in our cart, we want to create a special design for it. So over here in our UI, we see that we have the cart displayed and then some text telling us that the cart is empty. So to create this, we go back to the cart.js file. Now for all the current items that we have in our screen here, they will only be displayed if the length of the cart items is greater than 0. That is if we have at least one item in our cart. So over here, we'll handle it in the main container. Then we'll check cart items.length. And if that's greater than 0, we'll return all that we have here. So this means you have to wrap everything in a fragment. Now, just above this, we check for when the cat items.length is less than or equal to 0. That is when we'll display our empty text component. For this, we'll use the view as the outermost component. And this will have a style of empty cat. Inside this, we'll display an icon from feather. So we need to bring that from Expo vector icons. Now the name of the icon is shopping cart. And we'll give it a size proportional to the width of the screen. So over here too, we need to bring in our screen width constant from our constant file under config. So we'll set the size to 40% of the screen width. Now also give it a color. That is our tertiary color. And then we'll style it once again to have a margin at the bottom of 50 pixels. Now to see what we are working on here, let's copy and paste this declaration. Comment out the first one and then change this to an empty array. Good. Now we see what we are working on. Now after this feather icon, we'll have our styled text. The first one will say your cart is empty. And we want this to be a big text. So we can copy and paste this for the next text. And all this is saying is no items found in your cart. For this, we don't want it to be a big text. However, we'll style it a bit. And call this empty cart text. Now we need to center the content on the page. So over here in the styles, we'll first define the empty cart. Here we'll set the flex property to 1. Align the items to the center. And then justify the content to the center. Now for the empty cart text, we'll set the color to our tertiary color. And also give it a margin at the top of 5 pixels. Now with this done, we have the look of our empty cart page, just like so. Now let's move to the fun part. We want to start working on how we can add the items to the cart. And for this, we need a way to monitor the data. So we're making use of async storage and also context. For async storage, we defined a few functions in our storage file under utilities. So over here, we have a way to store data in the async storage and also a way to get data from the async storage. Also, we have context over here, and then we'll create one for monitoring the cart data inside the app. So to enable us to monitor our cart data with the context and async storage, we need to do a few setup in the app.js file over here. So at the beginning of the app, whenever this app is run, we call this prepare app function, which fetches all the data that the app is going to need. So at this point, we are going to assume that we've already stored some data regarding our cart. So over here, we are going to fetch that data from the async storage. So below this, we are going to do something very similar to what we have here. So for this, we'll call the variable cart items data. And then we await a call to the get data function. Now the key we'll be using will be similar to this. So we'll have the YNAB, and then we'll have cart items. Now once we have a value for the cart items data, we'll check if the value is not null, and then we'll go ahead to store it in a state just like this one. So we'll create a state here for the cart items, and then we'll have a set cart items. This will be an array, so we'll give it an initial value of that. Then over here, we'll call the set cart items. And then we'll pass the cart items data. Now to enable the content of our app to access the cart items that we just fetched over here, that's where we need the context. So over here in our context file, we'll create a new context and we'll export it as well. And this will be called cart context. Then back in the app.js file, we import our cart context. So from our utils, then context. Now over here, we should go to where we have our return, and then we use the provider of the cart context. So right where we have our navigation container, we'll call our cart context and we'll target the provider. And we'll make sure to wrap this around our navigation container. So we'll cut this and then paste it. Now we'll set the value, which is an object, and then we'll pass the cart items, and then the set cart items function, just like so. Now with this done, we can go ahead and start adding items to the cart. Now adding to the cart starts on the details page. So if we visit the details of the product, we see that we have the add to cart button over here. So to start our work, we'll visit the details screen under our screens directory. This is where we'll start working on adding to our cart. So over here, just below our use effect, create simple async function, which we'll call handle add to cart. Inside this function, we'll open a try catch block, and then we'll console.warn any error that we might get. Now we'll copy the name of this function and pass it to our add to cart button, which can be found here. So we'll pass it through the onPress property. Now working with our cart over here, we know that our cart items will be an array, just like we initialized over here in our app.js. So now over here, once we add to the cart, we've updated it. So we'll create a variable which we'll call updated cart items. And this will be initialized to an empty array. In adding an item to the array, we'll have an object of all the details of the product, and also add another property, which is the cart count. Now, since we are on the details page of the product, that shouldn't be a problem. So over here, we'll have the updated cart items, which will be assigned to another array, and then we'll have an object. And inside this object, we'll start by spreading the details of the fetched wine. Then in addition to this, we'll add a new property, which is the cart count. And for this, we'll set the initial value to 1. Because once we click on add to cart, it's just one item that we've added to the cart. Then after this, any other item that was already in the cart before we added ours, we need to put it back. So to have the items that were already in the cart, we need to bring in our cart context. So at the top, we import our cart context from our context file under utilities. And also to use this context, we need the use context hook from React. With this done, at the very top, just below the added to cart, we can destructure the cart items, then the set cart items from the use context of the cart context, like so. So back to where we're adding to the cart. After this, we'll spread all the items in the cart. Now once we've done this, we want to store this updated cart item back into our context and also in our permanent async storage. So for this, we'll create another function to handle that. And we'll call this save cart items. And we'll make this an async function as well. Then inside this, we'll open our try catch block. Now over here, this function will receive the updated cart items. Then in the try block, it will first store it in the async storage. So to be able to do that, we need to bring in our store data function from our storage file. So below this, we import store data from our storage. And then over here, we'll call the store data, pass the key, and also the updated cart items. Now the key we use here is very important, and it must match exactly what we used in the app.js file. So we can copy the name here and then paste it in the details page. So we store the data to this particular key. Now once we've stored it permanently in our storage, we can then update the context. So that will be set cart items. Then we pass the updated cart items like so. Now with this done, we'll call the save cart items here in the handle add to cart. So we'll call it and pass the updated cart items. And once we do that, we'll set added to cart to true. Remember, we have this state at the top here, added to cart, and also set added to cart. And this is what we use to monitor whether the current product we are viewing has been added to the cart already. So if it has, we go ahead to hide the add to cart button over here. If it has already been added to the cart, we then go ahead to show the remove button and then the counter, which we'll be working on in a bit. Now with what we've done so far, if we visit a particular product and we press on add to cart, we see that has been added to the cart, and now we see the remove button and the cart counter. But these buttons are not functional yet. We'll get them to work in a bit. However, if we go back and then return to the product again, we see that we have the add to cart button again. So this is not working as expected. So we need a way to check if the current product we are on has been added to the cart already, even after going back and visiting it again. So we'll create a new function for that, and we'll call this check cart status. Now in this function, we'll make use of the for of loop to loop through the cart items that we have over here to check if any of the items in the cart has an ID which matches the current product we are viewing. So over here, we'll have for, and then we'll be using the cart item. So constant cart item of cart items. Here we are checking if the current cart item we are viewing at has an ID which is equal to the current wine ID on the page. If that's the case, we'll set added to cart to true. There is one more thing we'll add in a bit, but for now, this is fine. Now once we have this, we'll call this function whenever the page loads. So we'll copy the name of the function and then visit our use effect hook. So right after fetching the wine details, we'll call this function. Just like that, we see that the page has updated, showing that the item has already been added to the cart. Now focusing our attention on the cart counter we have over here, we'll be passing a few more attributes to make it work. First of all, we want to pass the current count to it. That is the current quantity of this particular item that the user has added to the cart. So to make this easier for us, we'll create a state for it. So at the top, we'll create another state which we'll call cart count. And for this, we'll give it an initial value of 1. That's because if the user adds the item to the cart for the first time, we want it to be just one item. So we'll pass this to the cart counter through the count property. Now for this value to stay updated, when we make the check for the status of the cart item, after we've identified that the item is already in the cart, we want to update the cart count as well. And then for this, we will get the value from the cart item dot cart count. Remember that when we added the item to the cart, we added a new cart count property and then we set the value for the quantity. Now back over here, the next property we'll be passing is a function that will be called by the cart counter whenever the value changes. So for this, we'll call it setCount. And then over here, we'll reuse our handle add to cart function. Now this will need some modifications for it to work properly, but I'll work on it in a bit. And then lastly, we want to set a limit for our counter. Now this is because you don't want the user to be able to request for a quantity that is higher than the stock that you have available. So for this, we'll use a property from the data that is quantity available. So if we have a quick look at the data that we are working with under config, and then in the data file, we see that each of the data items over here has a quantity available key. So this should be part of your API design. So back in the details page, we'll target the first one, and then the quantity available. Now we'll continue in the cart counter file under inputs. Then visiting our product again, we see that it's still in the cart. Now over here, the first thing we'll do is to destructure all the new properties that we added. So we added a count, we added a set count, and also a limit. For the count value here, it will be used as the value of the test input. So over here, we can pass an object, then use the string literals to convert this to a string. So have the count like so. Then we can copy this value object here, then pass it to our second situation where we have the input. Now to avoid any undefined errors, we'll set our count to have an initial value of 1, and also the limit as well to have a default value of 1. With that done, we'll be creating a couple of functions that will be used to decrease the count when the minus is pressed on, and also one to increase the count when the plus is pressed. Also, we'll add another function for when the user edits the input here manually. So our first function will be for increasing the count. To increase the count, first we need the current count, and we want to ensure that it is an integer. So we'll pass it to an integer. Also, to ensure that we don't go overboard, we need the limit, and once again we'll pass it to an integer. Now once we have that, we can create a variable for our new count. Now for the new count, we'll first check whether our current count is greater than or equal to the limit. Now if the current count is greater or equal to the limit, there is no need to increase it. We'll rather return the limit because we can't go overboard. Otherwise, if that is not the case, then we'll just return the count and increase it by 1. And then we can go ahead to set the new value by calling the setCount function that we received, passing the new count. Now how about decreasing the count? Now for this, the crucial value is the current count. Now we can work on our new count. Now for this as well, we'll check if the current count is less than or equal to 1 because we are decreasing it. So we'll check for count is less than or equal to 1. Now if that's the case, we can't go any lower, so we'll just return 1. Otherwise, we can go ahead to decrease the count by 1. And then once we have that, we can set the count as our new count. Now what if the user enters the value manually? So for this, we'll create a new function which we'll call handle on end editing. Now for this, it will be a combination of the increasing and decreasing the count. Over here, we'll have our new count. And the first check we'll make is whether the count that the user entered is greater or equal to the limit. And we know from increasing the count that if that's the case, we'll end up returning just the limit. Now otherwise, if the count that the user entered is less than 1, we know that we can't go below 1. So we return 1 as the value. There should be a question mark. Otherwise, if none of this is true, then we just go ahead to return the count that the user entered. And then after this, we'll go ahead to update our value by calling the setCount function, passing the new count. Now I'll pass these 3 functions to the component here. With the lower touchable opacity, we'll pass it through the onPress. Then the value is decrease count. For the input, we'll pass it to on end editing. Then the value is handle on end editing. Now when the value of the text changes, that is on change text, we want to pass the set count. Then finally, when the user presses on the input field, we want to show only numbers. So we'll set the keyboard type. In this scenario, we'll be working with the number pad. With that done, we also pass the increase count to the plus touchable opacity. Now we need to duplicate what we've done here for the small input here. So we'll copy the onPress for the decrease and then paste it here. And then we'll copy the 3 properties we added for the input. Paste it here as well. Then finally, we copy the onPress for the increase. Like so. Now we go back to the details page and then to the details file. Over here, we go back to our handle at cart function. Now we see that according to how we used it in the cart counter component, we are receiving a count as a parameter. That is the new count of the product when the user interacted with the cart counter. So over here, we'll add a parameter called new count. Now, if you are dealing with a new count like this, then it means the item has been added to the cart already. So meaning adding to the cart like so will only be done if the item has not been added to the cart. So at the top, we'll make a check if the item has not been added to the cart already. If that's the case, that's when we'll make this implementation. And right after this, the count of the quantity in the cart is reset to 1. We'll set the new count here to 1. And then in the else block, this way we'll be doing the work of when it has been added to the cart already. So first of all, to be on the safer side, we'll check if the new count that we received is greater than 0. If it's 1, it's fine, but anything less than 1, we are not dealing with it. So here, we first want to locate the current item we are dealing with in our cart items. That is the list that contains all the items in the cart. So once we're able to locate it, then we can go ahead to edit just the cart count property of the particular item. So one way we can do this is to look for the index of the item in the cart items array. So to do this, we'll make use of the find index function. So here we'll have the item index. And then to get the index, we'll call cart items dot find index. Now this will take a function, and this function will have access to each of the cart items. And over here, we'll return the ID of the item if and only if the cart item dot ID is the same as our current wine ID. Now once we have that, we can update our cart items array by targeting the cart items, and then in particular the ID that we have now, so item index. Then we'll go ahead to specify that we want to update the cart count. Then we set the value to our new count. Once we have that, we need to update our updated cart items again. So just below the if statement, we'll have our updated cart items. And in this array, we'll spread our cart items. Now, once we do this with a new count, it means that the state that we created at the top here to monitor the quantity of the item that has been added to the cart is no longer valid. So meaning we need to update it. So one way we can do that is by passing the new count over here to the save cart items. So over here as a second parameter, we'll pass the new count. And over here in the save cart items, we'll receive the new count. And just after updating the cart items, that is the context, we'll call the set cart count again. Then we'll pass it the new count. Now with this done, we should be able to increase the quantity of the item in the cart and also reduce it. Perfect. Also, we should be able to use the input here to enter a manual value into the input field. Now to check if the limit is working, we cannot enter any value less than 1. So 0 will be reverted back to 1. Then if we enter a value that is more than the quantity available, so let's say 1666, it will be reverted to the maximum that we've specified in our data. However, there are a couple of issues here. The first one is that we can enter floating values. So for example, I can enter 1.5 and then it stays. This is not to be accepted. We can't have 1.5 of our product. Now how we can fix this is at the value section of the input field. You'll be making use of the math.round. So over here, we call math.round and then wrap it around our count. And then we'll do the same thing for the small one. So we copy the value and then replace the value here with it. Now when it's done, if we enter any value which is a decimal, it will be rounded automatically. And we see that actually we are not even able to enter the decimal any longer. Now we also have a situation where the value can end up not being a number. So if I enter a text value in here for my keyboard, we see that straight away the value changes to not a number. And regardless of what you do, you can't change it. So how we can fix this is that over here, wherever we put the value once again, we'll give it a fallback value of 1. So just after the rounding of the count, we'll bring our pipe symbol and then we give it a fallback value of 1. Then once again, we copy this value and then replace the value here as well with it. Once we do that, if we try to enter anything that's not a number, so fall back to the value of 1 and then we don't have that issue anymore. Now how about removing the item from the cart using the remove button? For this, we head back to the details page. Then over here at the top, we'll create another function for handling that. So we'll do that below the check cart status. And we'll call this handle remove from cart. This can also be made an async function. And then inside this, we'll have a try catch block. Now, to be able to remove an item, it has to be in the cart. So the very first thing we'll do is to check whether the current item we are dealing with has been added to the cart or not. Otherwise, we do nothing. So once we know that has been added to the cart, the concept of what we are doing is that we want to filter the particular item out of the cart items, and then we'll save whatever is left, both in the context and then in our async storage, which is permanent. So over here, once again, we'll declare an updated cart items. Then we'll call cart items dot filter. And this will receive a function, then it will have access to each of the cart items. And over here, we'll keep the item in the cart if and only if the cart item dot ID is not the same as our wine ID. So at the end of the day, this current updated cart item will not include the particular product that we are looking at the details now. So once we have this, we can call our function which saves the cart items once again. Then we pass the updated cart items. And then after this, we want to indicate that the item is no longer in the cart. So we set added to cart to false. Now the final step is to copy the name of this function and pass it to our remove button over here through the onPress property. With this done, we should be able to remove the item from the cart and then add it back once again. We see that adding it back, the quantity is reversed to 1, and that is what we want. Now up to this point, we've done a lot. So let's add the item back to the cart and get it to display on the cart page. So over here, we go back to our cart file. That is the cart.js file. At the top, we want to bring in our cart items context. So to do that, we'll first import the cart context from our context file under utilities. And now we need to bring in the use context hook from React. So import the use context from React like so. Then at the very top here, we can have the cart items and then the set cart items, or by using the context cart context. Once we have this, we can get rid of the old cart items. And now we see that we have our item in the cart. Very nice. Now let's make sure that all the features of the cart item here are working fine. So clicking on the cart item itself should lead to the details page. This is not working, so we fix it in the cart card. This can be found under components and then in the cart card file. Here we want to add an onPress property to the touchable opacity. And this will be handled in the function handle onPress. So at the top here, we'll create the function which we'll call handle onPress. Now to enable us to move, we need to bring in the navigation object, and then we can get this object by using the use navigation hook from React Navigation Native. Then at the top, before we use it, we declare the navigation object and then call the use navigation hook. Once we have that, in our handle onPress, we'll call navigation.navigate. Then we are heading to the details screen. And while going there, we need to pass the ID of the particular product we are looking for. And for the ID, we can destructure from the properties of the cart card. So we'll have the ID here. Then while moving to the details page, we'll pass the ID. So now on the cart page, if we press on the cart item, it should take us to the details of the page. And once again, it shows that the item is in the cart. Then we can go back like so. The next thing that needs to work is the count over here. Whenever we press on it, we get an error. So we need to fix it. To get the features of the counter to work properly, we need similar functions as what we did on the details page. So over here on the details page, we'll copy the two functions we created earlier. That is handle add to cart and then save cart items. So we'll copy them both and head to the cart card components. So just below the handle on press, we can paste them here. Now for this to work, we first need to bring in the cart context. So we import the cart context from our context file. Also, we bring in the store data function, which is linked to our async storage. And because of this context, we bring in the use context hook from React. Once we have these at the top, we can now declare our cart context. So we have in cart items and then set cart items. Then we get that from using the context cart context. Now in the handle add to cart, over here we are working on the cart page. So if you're on the cart page, meaning the item is already in the cart and there is no need to ever add it to the cart again. So at the very top over here, we can get rid of this check and then all the content here. And then we get rid of this ending curly braces. With this done, the only check we need here is to check if the new count we are receiving is greater than 0. And now the updated cart items variable will be used just once. So we can just declare and initialize it over here and get rid of the initial declaration. And now since we know that the item is already in the cart, we don't need this as well. For the save cart items here, we don't need the new count. And also while calling it, we don't need to pass it. Also, we don't have the cart count for the page over here because on this page, we have a whole bunch of the cart items. Now with the functions complete, we need two more properties in addition to the function to pass to the cart counter. So the very first one, as you remember, is the cart count. So at the top here with the structure, the cart count. We know that once the item is added to the cart, we add a new property cart count that is set to 1 by default. And in addition to this, we need a quantity available for the particular item. This is useful for the limit. Once we have this, we go to the bottom to the cart counter and then we set the count to the cart count. Also, to set count, pass the handle add to cart. Then finally, for the limit of the counter, we'll set it to the quantity available. Now once we've done this, our counter should work fine. So pressing on the plus, saying the wine ID doesn't exist. Okay, so this is referring to the check that we made in our handle add to cart function. So here we are comparing the cart ID to the wine ID. But on this page, we don't have the wine ID. We only have the ID of the product. So instead of wine ID, we replace this with ID. You have to ensure that this is the only check we are making here. And it looks like it. So once we make this correction, the cart counter should work fine. And then we can reduce it. And then also we can enter any value that we want. So far as it is less than the limit of the product. So this is working fine. Now the next thing that needs to work is the remove button over here. This should remove the item from the cart. And once again, this will be similar to the remove function that we created on the details page. So over here, we can locate the remove function, copy it, and then paste it inside the cart card. You can do that just below the save cart items. Now over here, once again, we know we are already in the cart, so we don't need to check whether we've added to the cart. And then afterwards, we don't need to set that we are no longer in the cart. Also, the wine ID here must be replaced with just the ID. Now once we've done this, we can copy the name of the function and then pass it to the touchable opacity, which is the close button. So this is the close button, so we can pass it through the onPress property. Once we've done this, pressing on the button here should get rid of the item in the cart. Now let's add the item back to the cart. So over here on the cart page, the next thing we'll be working on is the total for the cart items. So for the total, we'll go back to the cart page. And then over here, we'll create a new function to calculate the total. So this function will be called calculate cart total. And once again, it will be a simple function. Now over here, we'll first check whether we have any item in the cart. So we'll check if the cart items length is greater than 0. That is when we'll go ahead to do any calculation. So to get our cart total, we'll make use of the reduce method. That will make it quite simple to get the total easily. So call the cart items and then reference the reduce method. This will take a function, and then the function will receive two parameters. The first one is an accumulator, and then the second one is the current cart item. As a second argument to the reduce method, we'll pass 0. And this will be the initial value of the accumulator. So to get the total for our cart, we'll return the accumulator, which is currently 0, plus the cart item dot price times the quantity that has been added to the cart. So that would be cart item dot cart count. And once you have the value like this, we store it in a state variable. So at the top here, we'll create a state, which means we need to bring in the use state from React. This state will be called cart total. And then after we have the total, we just set cart total with the value we have. Now to be able to run this function whenever we are on the cart page, we need to bring in the use effect from React as well. Once we have this, just below the cart total, we call the use effect. Pass it a function and also an array. Now in the function, we'll call the calculate cart total like so. Now, whenever the content of the cart changes, we want to recalculate the total. So to be able to do that, we need to pass the cart items here to the array of the use effect hook. So this will ensure that whenever the value inside the cart item changes, the calculate cart total will be triggered. Now once we have this value, we can scroll to where we are displaying the total and then convert this to an object. And then we can make use of the string literals. So first of all, we need the $sign anyways. And then we add the $sign and then the object and then display our cart total. So we see that we have $27 here, which is correct. Then if we increase the quantity, it's changed to 54. And then it keeps on increasing based on the quantity of the item we have here. Now the next thing that needs to work after the total is the checkout. We'll not be doing any complex checkout logic for this project. However, we can just select a message and clear the content in the cart. So over here, just below our use effect, we can create another function which we'll call checkout. We can capitalize the out like so. You can start by just alerting checkout. Then we can bring in our cart total. Then after this, we'll call a function to clear the cart. So this function we'll call clear cart. This function can be an async one. And then it will have a try catch block. For the error, as usual, we'll console.warn it. Now in this function, all we want to do is to empty the cart items that we've stored in our context and also the one that we've stored in our permanent async storage. So we already have the function to set the cart items for the context. What is remaining is the one for the async storage. So at the top, we import our store data from the storage like so. And to get a head start on what we are doing here, we can go to the details. And then inside the save cart items, we can copy these two statements. And then back on the cart page, we'll paste it inside the try block. Now we are storing the data to the same key. However, for the value, we'll make use of an empty array. And then the same applies to the cart items here. Change it to an empty array. And inside the checkout, we'll call the clear cart. To complete this flow, copy the name of this checkout function and then we'll pass it to our checkout button through the onPress property. Now with what we've done, if we press on the checkout, we get the alert and then the cart is cleared. Let's add the item back to the cart again because we still need it. So the next thing we need working is the clear all button that we have in our header here. So for this, the clear cart function we just created will be of great help. So we can copy it. And then we can head to the cart stack that can be found under navigators. Over here, we can paste the function just above the return. And then back on the cart page, we can copy the cart items declaration like so, and then paste it here. With this done, we need to import the context as the cart context from our utilities and the context file. Also, we need to bring in the use context from React. And finally, we need to bring in the store data function from our storage. Now we ensure that we are on the cart page to see what is happening. Over here, we navigate to our cart screen and then our header right property. That's where we have our button. Now the first thing we want to do here is that we want to display this button only when there is something in the cart. So first of all, wrap the whole thing in a fragment. And inside this fragment, we'll make a check with the cart items context. So we'll check if the cart items.length is greater than 0. And if that's the case, we'll go ahead to return the touchable opacity. Now we can go ahead to pass the clear cart to the onPress. Then while we are here, let's add some padding to move it in line with the cart item. So through the style, we'll add a padding of 10 pixels. Like so, and now we have it in line. With this done, pressing on the button should get rid of the content of the cart. Now we see that this was too abrupt. Ideally, you want some form of confirmation before you go ahead to clear everything that the user has added to the cart. So in the future episodes, we'll add a modal which will enable us to confirm whether we want to clear the content or not. Now we are still not done here. So let's add the item back to the cart. The next thing we'll be working on here is the badge on the cart tab. So for this, we'll visit our root tabs. That is where we have our badge. And over here too, we'll be working with the cart items context. So from the cart stack, we can copy the declaration here. Then back in the root tab, we paste it at the top. With this done, we need to bring in the use context from React. So we import the use context from React. And also we import the cart context. Now, just like we did for our delete button at the top, first of all, we don't want to display this badge if there is nothing in the cart. So at the point where we display the badge, we'll make a check. Here, we want to hide this whole options object if there is nothing in the cart. So over here, we'll make a check for the cart items or length. I'll check if it's greater than 0. If that's the case, then we'll return the object here. While we are here, the value of the badge must match the length of the cart items. So we copy the cart items or length and then replace the value with it. Now if we go ahead to add another item to the cart, we see that the value increases to 2 because we have 2 items in the cart. And if we remove 1 from it, the value drops back to 1. Over here, for now, we don't need the set cart items, so we can get rid of it. Now we've done all the major things we need to do for this episode. Now let's see one extra thing that we want to add. It's a nice to have which will make the experience better. So over here in our images, we see that when the value of the cart counter is 1, all the decrease buttons are grayed out. This will indicate to the user that the buttons are disabled and there is no need to press on it. Now this will also be true when the maximum quantity available has been entered. The plus should be disabled. So to do this, we'll go to our cart counter and that can be found under the inputs under components. Now over here at the top, we'll create 2 new variables. The first variable will be called increase disabled. Now this value will be true if the current count is the same as the limit. So we'll check the count same as the limit. Now the second value is decrease disabled. And this will be true if the count is equal to 1. Now having the knowledge of these 2 variables, we'll go to attachable opacity here. So first of all, we want to disable our decrease button if decrease is disabled. So pass the disabled property and the value will be decrease disabled. Now once we have this like so, we want to style the button a bit differently. So we convert the style here to an array. And then for the second style, we only pass it if decrease disabled is true. Then we can go ahead to pass the styles dot disabled, which we'll implement in a bit. Similarly, the increase button will be disabled if increase is disabled. And then for the style, we can copy the style here and paste it. However, we are adding the disable style only if increase is disabled. This will be the same for the small counter. So at the top here, we copy decrease disabled and the style dot disabled. And then we add it to the touchable opacity here, just after the small button style. And then we'll go ahead to pass the disabled property. When decrease disabled, it's true. Also, we can copy the increase disabled and then the disabled style and add it to the small button for the increase. Once again, we'll pass the disabled property when increase disabled is true. With this done, we have to style the disabled buttons. And for this, all we are doing is to set the opacity to 0.4. Once we do that and visit our cart, we see that the lower button has been disabled and thus has been grayed out. And then if we increase it, the color returns, meaning that we can now decrease our count. This also applies to the details page. We see that the decrease here has been disabled, but if we increase the count, it comes back. Now if we enter a value, which will likely be the maximum quantity available, we see that now the plus is disabled, meaning we can't add more to this quantity. So this is working as intended. With this done, let's see if there is any unused code and then we can get rid of it. So on the cart counter, we are fine. In the cart stack, we are fine as well. In the root tabs, it looks good. On the cart screen, we need to get rid of this import of the function. Then once we've done that, it looks good as well. The details as well is looking okay. The context is fine. The index is okay. The cart card looks fine. The index is perfect. So we are done. I'll put a link to the code that we've written today in the description so you can check it out.